Welcome to the Highland Heights Bible class. Do not adjust your screens. You are in the right place. We're in a different place. Long story short, we were having some internet issues, and we're here now. We are in the Highland Heights Library, and we found some good books while we're here. So we're going to continue on with our Sunday morning conversation. We've been going through different questions of apologetics, defending the Christian faith, and considering some of the most difficult questions that are posed to the Christian faith. Usually we are going through Lee Strobel's The Case for Faith, which is an excellent book. You should check it out. And we're going to return to that book, but for tonight we're going to take a question from another book. This one's called The Reason for God. I will lean in close. It looks like that, by Timothy Keller. And specifically, the question that we're going to be talking about tonight is Christianity a straitjacket? So oftentimes, those who are outside the faith, but are somewhat familiar with the Christian faith, will bring up the idea that Christianity ties us. It binds us and takes away our freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of choice. Do we get to decide what our destiny is, what it means to be a good person? If the individual can't decide that, and it's decided by God on high, how can we be fully human in that way? Jeremy, how do you understand the question? How do you see it developing, and how should we as Christians think about it?
Well, I see it developing from a position, a couple of modern philosophical ideas.
Okay.
One is moral relativism.
Okay.
This idea that morality is relative, that does not exist outside of us, that we basically make up our own rules. That morality comes either from within us or from culture, cultural relativism, and that kind of cultures decide, and that therefore no one morality is superior to any other morality. And then the other idea is the idea of situational ethics, a situation where where the situation determines what is and is not correct, where it's almost a make it up as you go along. And in one situation something might be wrong, in another situation it might be right. And so it's this idea that in placing morality outside of humanity, we have taken away our freedom to determine our own morality. We are no longer captains or masters of our own fate. The idea that, as the Supreme Court case, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, where the majority opinion said that at the heart of liberty is this idea that each of us determines, morality determines existence for ourselves, and that is kind of the core of liberty. And so to take that away is to constrain human freedom.
And if we as Americans view liberty as the highest ideal,
right?
To what extent do we see that liberty is in conflict with faith?
Right.
Is in conflict with our Christian lives. And we both love liberty, but at the same time, we don't see it as the number one thing. It is not what controls our life. It's a good thing, but it's not a God thing.
Right.
So I think that these are, we're going down this road and trying to understand where is it that these people are coming from that would say that Christianity is a straitjacket. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I'm afraid that we would run into is that we would talk past someone that is bringing this up, because to us, the Christian faith is free. It's something that has made me the best version of me. It is something that, for the Christian, allows us to be closer to what we want to be. But at the same time, perhaps we don't know that when it happens. 1 Corinthians, where Paul talks about how to the Christian, to the one that believes, the message is the aroma of Christ.
Right.
But to those who are on the outside, it's a stench. It's a stumbling block. Foolishness. Thank you. So there is a tendency to not understand what they're talking about when they bring up this idea of the straitjacket.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a challenge in that we're coming from two different places.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges is When we say morality is absolute, what is heard is you are putting your morality above mine. And remember that idea that no one culture is superior to another. And as we talked about last week, Christianity or Christians have been guilty in the past of attempting to force Christianity, specifically a cultural Christianity, onto other people. We talked about the Spanish and not just the Spanish, but the Europeans coming to the New World and coming over and preaching Christianity to the Native Americans, and also trying to turn them into Europeans.
Right.
And so that idea of kind of a cultural imperialism or a moral imperialism, where we are going in, and this is what's heard, is a Christian says, you can't do that, that's wrong. Well, who are you to put your morality on me? And that was kind of, again, the Planned Parenthood v. Casey decision. That was one of the arguments, is it's fine if you want to define existence in the way you're defining it, but you can't impose that on someone else.
Right. So if you make this decision about what morality is for you, that's okay. You can do that, but you're not allowed to impose that on someone else.
Exactly.
I think that once again, we're discussing this idea of not having the same conversation with people, and one of the things I hear you saying is that the non-Christian will say, well, don't impose your morality on me. What I think I'm saying as a Christian is, you don't want me to impose God's morality on you,
right? Because
to me, my morality is God's morality. But to them, that's not the case. They might know that I think it's God's morality, but it's still my morality that I'm putting on them. So I think the burden is on us as Christians to make sure that we are communicating that this is not my morality. If we want to call it a straitjacket, I'm wearing a straitjacket. This is not something that is of my creation. It is of God's creation, but it's a good creation, and it's something that is worthy of being lifted up. One other thing that you're reminding me of is just I think it's important for us to remember that the person that is coming from this, from what we call the postmodern perspective, that morality is individually defined, is a long way away in terms of thinking from a Christian worldview. So we as Christians have a worldview that goes back thousands of years. We read about it not only in our sacred scriptures, but other world religions would have a God-centered worldview. We disagree with them, but we do share a God-centered worldview with them. So at least we have a starting point for conversation. That if God says that something is true, then that is the standard by which we work. Of course, over the past few hundred years, that has been broken down at the cultural level, to where culture, those who define what culture is, what's powerful within culture, have taken that down to deism, that God is far off, to modernism, questioning whether there is a God, and then the reaction to that has been that God is dead. Or in the latest interaction, and what we're talking about tonight, postmodernism, that each person defines their own morality. Now, one thing that we don't want to say tonight, kind of a straw man argument, is that that postmodernism says that there is no truth. What they are saying is that there's no one truth. They are saying that there is truth, but there are many truths. So you have your truth, I have my truth. And so it's not that people aren't getting to truth, it's just that everyone's getting to their own truth. And as the Supreme Court decision says, you can't inhibit someone from getting to their truth. Don't get in the way of them doing that. Of course, we as Christians believe that if there is a truth, there is one truth, and to get to our truth means to get to the one truth.
Right.
But that sounds so different. These two ideas, these two ways of thinking, even though they're distant chronologically, but they're also distant in the way that we talk about them. So it's hard for us to have these conversations with people and try to talk through these things. Anyway, what are some other things that we're thinking about?
Well, going along with this idea of truth, the idea of your truth versus my truth versus someone else's truth, that's an important distinction. And we need to make sure when we unpack that that we are being real about what truth is. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. Mm-hmm. And that's where the breakdown comes in, is we are saying this is real. This is true. And what we have to do is make the case that moral truth is the same as scientific truth, as historic truth, as logical truth, although ironically, historic truth has come under attack. Because it's this idea of, it's all a historical narrative. You can create a different narrative. We're fighting this battle right now in the field of history. But that doesn't change, and this is something that I tell my students is, we may interpret the events differently, but the events occurred. And you cannot force events and force historical people into boxes that they were not in.
Yes.
You cannot take a historical person and have them stand for something that they never would have stood for. Mm-hmm. Because that's not who they were, because they're real people, they really existed.
Right.
Okay. In the same way, moral truth, it exists. It is. And what's ironic is people will say, there's your truth and there's my truth, which that works really well for them, until you get to something that they find morally objectionable.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's, no, that's wrong. Well, based on what? Why? Why is that wrong?
Right.
And so all of us, and this kind of goes to the moral argument for the existence of God, all of us within us carry this instinct that there are some things that are wrong. You will not find anyone, just to pick something particularly heinous, you will not find anyone who, in the modern world, who would seriously say, cannibalism sometimes it's okay. It's like, no, we're all going to say, no, that's wrong. Right. So things like that we all agree, if you put that before someone and say, well, okay, what about cannibalism or something like that? They would say, no, that's wrong, especially if they're the one who is being the victim. Mm-hmm. So we all have that sense of there's truth. It's just taking that and saying, okay, we all agree that there is a moral truth. Now let's talk about what it is and talk about where it comes from. Mm-hmm. Because if it doesn't come from us, it comes from something higher. And if it comes from outside the universe, that is definitionally God.
That's well said. One of the difficulties we have here, you made the juxtaposition that we as Christians need to view morality as just as much set in stone, if I can use that verbiage, as we believe the laws of physics to be, as we believe the hard sciences to be. Now, you have a historian and an economist talking here, and so we're in this world of the softer sciences. Now, you mentioned that in history, we're talking about real people who did real things, and so we look for evidence to tell us about what they believed. A more literary approach to history, it seeks to write narratives about history. And the same thing happens in economics, and the same thing happens in biblical studies. That people try to tell a story using some facts, but the narrative is meant to build an argument rather than to build a factual argument.
Exactly.
It's meant to support a case that is being made. And so we have this difficulty of convincing someone when we're not using the same rules of building arguments with facts. That said, I think that the argument that you used about of at least convincing someone to get on the same footing, do you believe that there's at least one group of people or one person that could do something and believe it to be true, and that it's still wrong? So at least we hold some truths to be higher, and that's a good place for starting. Another idea that's brought up that I think is interesting to talk about is group dynamics. And Christians have, throughout history, and specifically I would say over the past 40 to 70 years, somewhere in there, Christians have been accused of being exclusive, that we are not including of all people. I'll first point out the irony that for people who know about the church and what the church has been since the time of Jesus has been accepting of all people, but let's put that aside for a second. What the argument is that our group has such strict rules, we do not accept other people to be a part of our group. And because of that, that is not what a democratic group looks like. And if that's one of our highest values, then Christianity doesn't do a good job of supporting that free-minded, liberty-minded way of viewing the world. Jeremy, is Christianity really, it's exclusive or lacks the inclusivity we wish it would?
Well, okay. Let's think about what are we talking about when we talk about exclusivity, inclusivity, sure. and let's consider the idea of democracy. Mm-hmm. Is Christianity exclusive? In a sense, yes. Mm-hmm. In that we are saying that there is one moral code, and there is one truth, and there is one embodiment of that truth. Mm-hmm. Now, here's where it's not exclusive. It is inclusive because just because some Christians have wrongly pushed people away who they shouldn't have, mm-hmm. and that has happened. Let's be honest. It's happened. That doesn't mean that everyone is excluded. In fact, Christianity is probably the most inclusive religion in all of world history. You don't have to. Well, okay, you don't have to belong to a certain tribe or a certain group of people. Mm-hmm. You don't have to learn a certain language. Anyone is welcome to come to Christianity, and indeed, when you look at Christian history, it's remarkable the ways in which you can take the gospel to another culture, mm-hmm. and it be welcomed. And the way that they go about being Christians, their culture will be transformed, but they won't look like Western Christians. Right. And that is perfectly acceptable and perfectly fine. As long as, and look, we're not talking about changing the core of the gospel. We're not talking about taking things away. We're not talking about denying the core truths of the gospel. Mm-hmm. We're talking about meeting practices will not look the same in another culture that mm-hmm. they look like here. Nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what Christ says is all can come. There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free male, all of that. All can come. All can come on an equal basis. Right. And Christianity says all are equal before God. Now, we're all equal because we've all sinned. Which is where this idea of, well, that doesn't seem democratic. Well, it's not. It's not supposed to be. Right. The reason we hold democracy as such a high virtue is that Christian idea of we are all equal. We're all on the same level. We're all created in the image of God and are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights is the way it's expressed in our culture. Well, okay, when we come to the church, it's not a democracy because we may all be equal, but we're all equal before a king. Hmm. And not only are we equal before a king, we're equal before a perfect king. Right. And that is the advantage God has over a human king, is he is perfect.
It's interesting when we put Christianity under the same microscope that we might put other groups, we would see that no group is inclusive in this high ideal of having no standards. All groups have standards, otherwise it ceases to be a group mm-hmm. at that point. What's the Will Rogers quote? I don't want to be a part of any club that would accept me as a member. Yes. Okay. Exactly. So in order to have membership in a group, mm-hmm. you need to have some moral code, some standards for what it means to stand up for the mission of that group. If you want to be a part of the church, you need to be on mission. Right. That's what it means to be a part of this group. And so we as Christians are exclusive in that we serve the one king. We are mm-hmm. all equal under his kingship and serving him. Keller brings up this point. If you want to have a true test of what it means to be inclusive, who is your group serving? Who are mm-hmm. you reaching out to? The Islamic faith is still centered in the Middle East. They say that you have to learn Arabic in order to fully understand their text. We as Christians, we're translating the Bible into every language that we possibly can. Yep. That is the mission, that everyone would hear the good news, to go into the farthest places. That was the original commandment. Right after Jesus goes, the angels come down. I guess Jesus said it right.
Jesus said it before that.
Jerusalem, Israel, Samaria, the rest of the world.
Acts 1.
So spread it out. Let's get it out there. That's an inclusive message that mm-hmm. wants to bring all people to the gospel. Now, I will say this about myself, and I think I can say this about a lot of Christians. I don't do the best job of promoting that mission, but it doesn't mean that that's not the mission of what it means to be a Christian. So, all right. So we've talked about the idea of truth and how the postmodern ideal can get us away from that. We've talked about the inclusivity of the church. We've got about 10 more minutes. So let's talk about this final idea of the straitjacket,
right?
And that it binds our decision making. That I can't be a full expression of myself if I completely give over control of my life to someone else. Jeremy, is that an accurate representation, or is it maybe just not a full picture of what it means to be a Christian?
I think it's not a full picture, and part of that may be people don't want to hear the true picture. Part of that maybe we have not done as good a job of conveying what we're saying, because those who say it's a moral straitjacket might argue that we cannot be fully quote unquote actualized. You can't be self-actualized if you're restraining yourself in this way. Well, a couple of problems with that. Number one, just following your rampant id anywhere it wants to go does not end well. Okay, I mean, there's a reason toddlers don't stay by themselves. It's basically rampaging id. But the second thing is, let's redefine what it means to be human. And if God is the source of moral truth, what does He say it is to be human? Let us make man in our image. And so in God's image He created them. Male and female He created them. Okay, so it is not a straitjacket to be like God. It is actually liberating to be like God, because that's what we're made to do. There's a saying, when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail, which works really good if you're trying to nail something together. But if you're trying to saw wood, that's not going to end well. Okay, and so what you have with with the modern philosophies is you're trying to saw wood with a hammer. Okay. We are made to be like God. When we think of ourselves in that way, then all of a sudden accepting the morality of God, and that word there is so key, accepting the morality of God. Accepting God's morality means accepting who we are. It means casting off all of the problems that come when we try to make ourselves God. And it means casting off all of the problems that come when we want to, when the fruit was good for food and good for the eyes and good for making one wise. Okay, the lust of the flesh, pride of life, lust of the eyes. I got those out of order, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Okay, look at all the problems that come from that. Okay, we are casting those problems aside when we try to become like God. And we're not doing it because we're being forced to. We talked a few weeks ago about how all of this is our choice. And it has to be a choice that's freely given. You cannot force someone to be a Christian. It is not a moral straitjacket when we make this choice to be like God, because we are choosing to be our best selves. Because we're choosing to be like the one that made us.
Yeah. It's freeing that we're coming back under the rule of the righteous king. I do a really bad job of being my own king, and I've tried. I've done a really bad job of making my own choices, and I've been given every opportunity to do it right, and I continually fail. I think we as Christians too quickly forget that God is perfect, that His way of living is righteous and right and makes my life better, and I fall in love with my way of doing things really quickly. You made me think about how for a business person, or trying to think, for someone who has a very regimented way of looking at the world, life is an optimization problem, that they want to make the most money. I want to be the best at my profession, and that's kind of the way that I measure my life. Well, if I'm the best at doing life the way that I define it, but I define it wrong, if I set the wrong thing to optimize, if it's not money that really matters, then what is life for at that point? If I don't realize that to fear and honor and serve and love God is the chief purpose of life, then it doesn't really matter what level of freedom I've been given. It doesn't matter because I've trained myself to do the wrong thing. One example that Keller offers, and I'll personalize this one. Currently, Elizabeth, my 5-year-old, is learning to play the piano. Right now, she's getting better. She's better than she was when she started, but she's still not great. Okay. Is that what she is looking for? The freedom to just hit whatever key she wants to? No, that's what the 1-year-old does. Yeah, so, like that's what a complete beginner does. Is the freedom to hit whatever we want. No, and Keller brings out at this point, the freedom comes when you have subjected yourself to the hard, strenuous activity of continuous practice, of continuous learning over the course of years, decades, so that at the very end, a concert-level pianist has the freedom to make beautiful music. Mm-hmm. Something that a novice like myself, who's never had a day of practice in his life, has no freedom to do. Even though I have the freedom to hit any key, I don't have the freedom to make something that is beautiful. So.
Yep, absolutely. It's like the old saying, what's the best way to get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. Yeah. And we laugh about that, but you think about anyone who is at the top of the world. We're recording this on the day the Braves won their first postseason series since 2001.
How old were you? Were you in college?
I was in college, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Careful. Anyway, so you think about, and they had a great series.
Yeah.
And somebody said, well, the team they played didn't have that great an offense. And I've seen people respond, that doesn't matter. These are Major League Baseball hitters.
Yeah.
Think about the hours that go into what you have to be the best. Hours and hours and hours and hours. Time that they could have spent doing other things. Mm-hmm. They could have spent, all those hours and all those years that they were learning to play this game, just doing all sorts of other things and having all sorts of fun. The starting pitcher today was drafted as a high schooler. Okay. He spent hours in high school learning how to pitch. And then he was drafted, didn't go to college, went straight into the minor league system. How many hours of what we consider just wonderful, fun, free years of our lives, those late teens, early 20s, has he spent on a baseball diamond? Today he pitched 6 shutout innings.
Yeah.
I mean, so that idea of practice, of growing. See, anything we want to do, we are going to give up other things that we could be doing. This is the most valuable thing we can be, is a child of God.
Yeah. It truly does reveal what is most important. When all else is burnt away, mm-hmm. what remains?
Exactly.
What is the one thing that will survive the fires of this life? And unless you are, I'm probably mixing metaphors here, but unless you are building your hopes on God, in Jesus, what's going to be left?
Yep.
We just have a few minutes left, so we always do it this way. Closing thoughts. What's the one takeaway? Because while you're thinking about this, I think that this is the one question that most people are going to come with. A lot of the questions we've talked about require study on behalf of the non-Christian to mm-hmm. kind of think through those things. But this is one of those that seems to be a problem for a lot of people. So, Jeremy, what's your takeaway here?
A takeaway is just to bring all of these thoughts together when you're talking to someone about this, is to make sure we're not making it a list of what not to do. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the reasons I think people take this impression away, is that it's a list of what not to do. That's not what we're talking about. We need to redefine the question into less of what can't we be and more of what can we be. Why are we here? This is the existential question. Why do we exist? We are made in the image of God. Now that requires taking ourselves off of the throne. And that's a problem for a lot of people.
Hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. I'm not very good at it. I mean, so we need to take ourselves off the throne and remember, why are we here? Because when we're truly fulfilling our purpose, that is when we are at our best.
You're making me think of one of my favorite quotes. I've probably said it in this class before. Romans 12, verse 1. And the response to that, the problem with living sacrifices is that they keep crawling off the altar.
Yeah.
That is what we do. We offer ourselves to God, but we often give up because we think it's too hard. I would say if you find someone in your life that says, I just don't want to give myself over to that, remind them that you're going to give yourself over to something. A famous agnostic atheist in a graduation speech once said, everyone worships. It's just a question of what are you going to worship. Your friend and you are going to make a choice about what will I worship. Offer them this. Worship something that's worthy. You pick something that is worthy of your time. If you're going to dedicate your life to something, do it for something that's not going to just be wasted, that has some impact on the world. For all of the harm that those who have professed the name of Christ have done, there's a whole lot of good that is done when Christ is truly followed and truly worshipped in the way that he wanted us to do. So we've got, how many more weeks do we have with this? Just a few more, right?
Yeah, just 3 or 4, I think. Yeah,
okay.
3 or 4.
So we have a few more weeks of these conversations with apologetics questions, and we hope to be back together on Sunday mornings together. Sunday nights are coming, actually when this video is posted, it's tonight that we are coming back for Sunday night, so we hope you will be there too. But until then, we will see you next week here.
See you next week.